Hi guys, welcome to Dead by Tomorrow Interviews. My name is Daniel Winter and my co-host is Andrew Monroe. As we explore different topics that are worth thinking about today, we want to bring in guests to share their own unique perspective. We hope you enjoy hearing from our guests as much as we enjoy talking to them.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dead by Tomorrow. We have Faith McAllister on, or I guess Dr. Faith McAllister, if I was to be proper here. She is I guess I don't know what to say you are. You are technically a trained optometrist, but that's not your trade. So we'll get into that because obviously I butchered something here. But you're a friend of one of ours, and you're not actually somebody we have actually met personally before. So I'm really excited to jump into this, and we'll let you kind of give a little more background on yourself so I don't ruin it any further. Tell us a little bit about what you do, where you live, the whole shebang.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is so exciting. It's definitely not something I have done before. Kayci, she's a dear friend of mine, and we actually went through optometry school together. So we always joke like this group of girls that we were all very close in optometry school. Like we went through the trenches together, those bonds that you make in any type of schooling at that level. It's just kind of, well, we all made it out alive together,
Mm-hmm.
But she has been an incredible friend and a great inspiration and just a great person to have. And she connected. She's like, hey, you have a really interesting job and I have some friends that would like to talk to you about it. I'm like, sounds like fun. So here we are.
You want to get into a little bit of what a really interesting job is? Because I feel like, that coming from an optometrist, which I personally think is an interesting job. What is it that somebody who has an interesting job is like, no. Like, you got to talk to this person. What they do is really cool.
Yes, I work in industry. Whenever you look at healthcare professions as a whole, that's kind of how close are you to patients of a spectrum kind of between patient care and the research bench. Because anytime you have products that help patients, in my case, help patients see better, that's kind of the Alcon slogan where I work, is there has to be people that guide those companies to help make good medicine and good products and good technology for patients. Because if it's just, businessmen making things, you have to have people who have had experiences close enough to patients to really help, as well as individuals experienced with other doctors to bring that perspective. So in the grandest scale, that's kind of what I do, is I help bring a clinician's and patient's voice and opinion to this realm of, in my case, Alcon. So my specific role or my job title is I am a medical promotional reviewer. What that means on a more functional or day-to-day basis is any type of promotional material you see, and this ranges all the way from like pamphlets that you would get at an optometrist office, all the way to like we build slide decks, or they're called KOL decks for like our big key opinion leaders, the big, doctors that give lectures on our products to help review those type of material. I mean, I've even listened to commercials and podcasts and our virtual reality simulators. All of that is considered in some capacity promotional material because it is promoting our products and it is talking about their safety and efficacy. So it's important for us to take a look at that to ensure that what we are saying to the public is accurate as well as keeps their best interest in play. So anytime something like that is created, it comes before essentially a board. And that board is comprised of a medical reviewer, a legal reviewer, and a regulatory or an FDA specialist reviewer. And those are kind of the key components. So I sit on the medical side of that. So when something comes through, it's my specific role to go through and look through all these claims, right? We have the best lens in the world, or you'll see 12 times better with this. Everybody likes our products way better than the other brands, to look through all of those things and say, one, is this good for the doctor and good for the patient? Because does this matter? Are we talking about weird metrics that don't actually matter in clinic. That could be considered misleading. So the kind of big standard is we don't want to be false or misleading. Everything's going to kind of come back to that. So do we have the academic and the scientific support? We can't go start saying a bunch of things that aren't true. That's illegal because it's false. Are we emphasizing things we shouldn't be, or are we placing certain words in certain places and putting pictures in places that can be misleading to a patient? And that's kind of my role, is to look through there and say, hey, you've pulled a sentence from this, peer-reviewed published manuscript, but their data doesn't actually support that. Like when you look through their results, like I've gone through there, they didn't pull that right. We can't say that, because if somebody comes back and challenges us, if they try to sue us, we don't actually have the support. So that's more of the technical side of the job, is reading through reports, whether it's published studies or internal in-house data, of looking, what is our sample size? What is the methods? How did we make this? What are the statistics behind this? Is this powered appropriately for us to be able to make this claim? And then a lot of it is also sitting in meetings and talking with people. And if we can't say this word, what word can we say? And coming to a common ground place where everybody is a little bit unhappy, but nobody is super mad.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've got kind of a whole host of follow-up questions, but I guess one thing to start is, what you're describing, it sounds like you're really, in a lot of ways, almost a product expert when it comes into kind of the marketing that Alcon does, like being able to say, okay, we have to do marketing, but like in order to do that, we have to come and we have to say these things that are, really true. Like anybody can go and, like, I don't know, for something like shoes or food, we can be like, hey, these shoes, like, they make you look the coolest of anybody, and like nobody's doing a research paper to validate that. But if you're going out and you're saying, hey, these contacts are going to give you night vision, if that's not true, there's real repercussions for that. So that being said, was your undergraduate degree kind of more business focused? Did you go into optometry school kind of knowing that you were going to lean industry, or was there something that happened along the way to push you that direction?
Yeah. So when I was a senior in high school in a small town in Nebraska, I, through a series of events, kind of realized I really wanted to go into medicine, and I shadowed a couple of different doctors, and my cousin-in-law, who is an optometrist at a really beautiful primary care private practice in Nebraska, and I shadowed with her for a couple days. I was like, this is great. This is fantastic. Like, you get those patient interactions, but you don't have like as much of the on-call. Your hours are a little bit more controlled. I like that environment better than I did some of the big hospitals. It felt like it was, maybe one step down from a lot of the just tough insurance stuff that you end up with. I was like, this is great. I love this. This is what I want to do. So I went into undergrad just with fire underneath me, eye on the prize. This is what I'm doing. And I actually graduated my undergrad in 3 years, because this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. And I was going full force at it. And I did. Because of that, and how you take the OAT, which is kind of the MCAT for optometry, I ended up having to take a gap year, which is a whole story in and of itself. But after that gap year, I went to optometry school in Houston. And same thing, like, start an optometry school. I am here to become an optometrist. I'm going to help patients. And this is training me for private practice patient interactions. And a lot of things about school, like, kind of helped you a little bit aggressively along that funnel. And so that was very much my headspace from senior year of high school into my first year of optometry school. Like, I'm going to be a clinician. Because of how my scholarship was set up for optometry school, I had to remain in the state for my first summer. And optometry school is a 4-year doctoral program. And just similar to med school, the first summer is the only summer you get off. So I had to find something to do during that summer. And I was going to work. Our university had a research program. So I was like, well, this is great. Like, I would love to do research. When I was in undergrad, I did a research project with some optical fibers that was really fun. I was like, this will be great. I can definitely jump into a research role, have a fun summer, and it'll be great. I cannot emphasize how incredibly blessed I was to be paired with the advisor that I was. Nimesh Patel, I would not have been near as successful in research. I would not have my job. I would not have my master's if it was not for how incredible of an advisor he was. Not just from a scientific standpoint, but from a relationship standpoint of how he interacted with me as a student, as well as all the other students when he taught classes. So I was able to do research that summer, and I fell in love with research. And I was excited to wake up, and whether it was literally sitting in a lab for 6 hours looking at OCT scans or being up in the lab with subjects, it was so much fun. And I just loved it. And that kind of transitioned that next year of an opportunity to continue that. Houston Optometry School has a really unique program where if you want and you want to put in the work, you can get both your doctorate of optometry as well as a master's in its physiological optics is what the official title is, but it's right, like a master's in research if you want to do them. And I had already kicked off like a bunch of hours by doing that summer research program. And I did very well with that program and I really loved it. So I had talked with a lot of people and had a lot of encouragement to like, hey, they will pay for the master's. You might as well just like throw it in there. Just like do the master's in addition to the doctorate. And at the time you're like, oh yeah, this sounds like a great idea. It won't be that much more work, which was, delusional, but sometimes you have to make the crazy decisions up front. But what it translated into at school was, on top of being in a very intense medical program, I would show up an extra hour early in the morning to kick on my computer and start looking at scans. Over lunch, I would eat my food fast and then I would go up to the lab to work and then come back down and go to, whatever my clinical lab was, or I'd be staying extra time at night before I'd go home and then start studying for classes. And it never felt like work. It was such like a peaceful thing for me to do, and I absolutely loved it. When it came time to actually write papers and write the thesis, that's probably a little bit of a different story, but it was so worth every single extra minute and all the extra, blood, sweat, and tears that I had to put in because I learned just as much, if not more, through going through that master's program at the same time as my doctorate. It pushed me, beyond just about anything, but I learned so much through that program. So because of that, sorry, long story. When I'm coming out of optometry school, I was kind of looking at some options and talking to some people. And at that point, I wasn't fully convinced that private practice is what I wanted to do. So I actually reached out to a good friend who was a professor at Houston when I was there, and I knew she was now at Alcon. And so I reached out to her and I just said, hey, I'm kind of looking at options. I know I have this master's, which could be really helpful if I wanted to look at an internship in industry or something like that. And again, just incredibly blessed to have that relationship. And she was like, actually, I think there might be a job that you would be really good for, because she knew me. And a couple interviews later and a long car ride, and I signed with Alcon, and I have loved it ever since.
That is an amazing story. There's so many places to go, but honestly, we could just wrap now. We could just be done and just call that the podcast if you want. You hit on just about everything that a person could do right in a learning and career setting. You had your gap year, which I'm sure was a blast, but you learned some stuff there. And basically, you had this goal that you were pursuing. You pursued the goal, but you were still willing to take the pivot when new experiences showed you that, like, hey, this thing I've been spending a lot and a lot of effort on is needing me to shift priorities. And then you took from there and you're like, all right, cool, I'm going to shift priorities maybe. And oh, it's going to be harder if I do that. And you still took the step because I know you said you're like, oh, well, it's a master's. What's the difference? But like, I'm pretty sure at the time you were probably like, oh, can I do this? Can I actually handle running two different programs at once? And I'm sure as easy as you might have thought it was, you didn't think it was easy per se. You probably knew you're getting into a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of that was probably because of that gap year. And I call my gap year the year that God just made me do trust exercises for a whole year. I tend to be a pretty planning person. I like to have a plan. I want the game plan, like, let's go. This is what we're going to do. And that was the year that God kind of just went, I don't think you trust me enough. So let's just take a year to practice some trust exercises. And I'm going to show you that even when you don't have a plan, I do. Yes. So the year God made me do trust exercises. There was literally a couple times where I didn't know where I was going to live the next weekend just because of a series of unfortunate events. And that very much made me kind of just take a step back and have a better attitude about opportunities of I'm going to try and stay more open to the opportunities in front of me rather than setting a goal and closing off other opportunities to it. When I was looking at career paths when I was young, one of the best advice anybody ever gave me about looking for a job was don't think about the job that you want to do for the rest of your life. Think about the lifestyle that you want to live and find something that fits that. And find something that you enjoy and you're good at, but don't let that be what you're going to do, because inevitably it's not going to look exactly what you think it's going to look like when you're in high school and staring down the barrel of what major do I choose, and this is going to control my whole life. If traveling every day of your life is what you want to do, okay, what type of career paths can help me do that? So when I looked at the type of lifestyle that I wanted to live, at the time, optometry, private practice, that's what filled that. And then as I moved forward, it was okay, does Alcon still allow me to live the type of lifestyle that I want to live? And the answer was yes. So it was still, using my gifts and my talents and my education just in a very different way. And I would never expect to be where I am, but I get to have some of the most incredible conversations with some of the most incredible, intelligent people in this industry and arguably in the world. And it's so fun. It is so much fun.
Man, Daniel, I think I need to quit working on this. I'm going to go try and go to optometry school. I don't think it's going to work out for me, but I got to give it a shot.
Hey, it's a great profession to be in, but
that's cool. You are doing an amazing job at giving us good information there on how this kind of process went through. So thank you. We're learning a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have even known to ask you about. So that's cool. So I want to jump more into that, but let me pivot you real quick because I like to try and keep you off your toes. You're too confident in this. So when we were getting ready to talk about this, before we hit the record button, you had said that today you've been working on some woodworking. Was that something that popped up during COVID? Or is this something that has also gone hand in hand with what sounds like a wildly time-intensive time, pursuing this career?
I was very blessed with parents that pushed us to be well-balanced kids. Even from a young age, I was taking piano lessons in kindergarten, and that was a standard for all of us. And that music allowed me to continue on and play all the way through college. And it's part of the reason I got into the college that I went to. But also there wasn't I also remember as a kid doing woodworking projects with my dad. And when we did remodeling stuff on our house, it was very, okay, all the kids are going to help. And on Thanksgiving weekend one year when my dad comes home, he's like, I've got a present for you guys. And we're like, yes, weird, but Thanksgiving present. Okay, normally we get presents at Christmas, but we'll take a Thanksgiving present. He's like, I found hardwood on sale at Menards. We're putting in a hardwood floor today. And we're like, what?
Oh, no.
So like cut scene to 4 children, like with our volleyball knee pads on, like putting in a hardwood floor into our house. And then when I was doing theater in college and it was like, okay, we have to build sets. It was great. It was such a good balance between that and like science, which is so just sitting down and memorizing and trying to understand things in this very cerebral way to get to have something that is a like tangible and physical expression that you can see go from point A to point B balances my brain so well. And it's always been something that's provided that balance, whether it's music or physically building things. It's always something I enjoy. This morning, I was literally almost giddy. I was like, I can't do this project with this like piece of sandpaper that I've done the last like 4 projects in my apartment for. I want the electric sander. And I went out and we bought it. I was like, yes, this makes me so happy. And it was so much fun. My boyfriend, he was like, I think there's a lot of your dad in you, Faith. I was like, yes, there is. Like, I'm very excited about power tools.
He said shaking
Yes.
in the corner of the bedroom as you're revving it up. Tell him he can have my number if he needs to call for help.
No, I mean
Rehome him.
he is fully in it. Like he always takes like a little bit longer to get on, but pretty soon it's like, this is a sander that I bought, and like you're just going with it now. Like you keep using it. It's a great like building projects with a significant other, like really test a relationship, and it's always a good thing to do.
I can totally relate on the woodworking side of things. Now, my wife Hillary and we haven't really done a project together, but we might have to try that. But as far as the, going from doing something where you're kind of in your head a lot, like I'm not doing anything scientific, but I do a lot of people management and a lot of relationship management. And that's just exhausting in one way because you don't necessarily see a lot of the fruits of your labor. But then, yes, to go and just build a bench or build a shelf or whatever it is, where it's like, all right, I'm going to put these things together and then I follow the process and it's done. Like that's definitely satisfying. I also wanted to ask, so I saw your COVID-19 original song on Facebook. You didn't play the piano in that, you actually played the ukulele. So is that something you learned growing up, or was learning the ukulele like a COVID habit or a COVID hobby?
Picking up the ukulele was actually an optometry habit. When I was in high school and a little bit in undergrad, whenever I would come home, I would pick up my mom's guitar. All of our music talents we get from my mother. She's an incredible musician. That side of the family, very musically inclined. So I'd always pick up my mom's guitar and I'd relearn like 3 or 4 chords and I'd get my calluses, and then inevitably I'd have to go back to school or something. And when I got into optometry school, like I didn't have a piano around me. I didn't have any musical instrument. And I knew that I would need that for optometry school. I was like, well, I can't drag a guitar all around because, I would travel home and travel back. And I was like, oh, I could do a ukulele. Like I could pick that up. And so I put it on my Christmas list, and my parents got me a ukulele for my first Christmas in optometry school. And I've just kind of played it, picked it up here and there ever since. And it's really fun. It's super easy to play. When I go camping, we take it. When I travel, I'll take it. And it's a really an easy string instrument to play. It's really, really fun. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I can play a few chords along to accompany myself if I've had a few too many glasses of wine is when it normally comes out, or if we're bored because it's the very beginning of quarantine and we're going to write a COVID song.
That's fantastic. I think one of my favorite genres of music, which I don't know if this is a genre, but it should be, is basically just kind of joke songs. I'm a sucker for them.
I can attest to that. Daniel loves those songs. And he finds them like a truffle sniffing hog. He has a talent for it.
I was going to say, that's the first time I've been called a truffle sniffing hog, but I'll take it.
All right, we're also going to be referring to Faith from now on as the doctor of all trades. So congratulations on the promotion. We didn't know you
Thank
needed
you.
it, but here we are.
Thank you. But just like a good balance in life. And I'm by no means an expert at it. Like I just like a lot of people, COVID hit and it's harder to stay in shape and be motivated. And I've tried to get back with that, but being outside, like there really is something about just being in nature and getting outside that's good for the body, the mind, and the soul, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And from what I can tell, it looks like you've been in a lot of places that are kind of friendly to being outside. So I think you're from
Yes.
Nebraska, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these, but from Nebraska, was in California for a little while, like San Diego, then obviously went to optometry school in Houston. I think I found something like a camp that you might have been at in
Oh,
Oregon.
yes.
Now you're in Fort Worth.
Yes.
Like that's a lot of different places. And so what are some of just the highlights and some of your favorite things that you've done in each of those areas?
I mean, Nebraska born and raised, probably the greatest thing that I took away from like Midwest Nebraska culture is one, like amazing food. There's very good cooking as well as work ethic. There are few other places where the work ethic is paralleled to like just, and it's probably in part just the family I grew up in, but we're going to wake up and we start at 8 and you go till lunch and then you go till we're done. And if we start something, we're going to finish something. And that is the standard that we operate at. And that is something that, I've just carried through of if we're going to do something, we're going to do it right. And we're going to put in the effort to do it right. And that's obviously has impacted everything else I've done. I did my undergraduate school in Irvine, California at Concordia University, which, really like a lot of kids was the first time that I was completely accountable for myself. There was no one, I didn't have a curfew, you don't have anything else. So learning how to study again, learning how to manage my time, as well as learning how to, kind of start social interactions. I'm not a big social person. I'm pretty happy being an introvert most of the time. So starting to push some of those things. Then yes, I have a cousin who lives in San Diego. So I did some time down there and I spent some time with her. My first 2 summers, I worked at a camp up in Oregon that just taught me how to work with other people so much better. There is definitely a different mentality up in the Northwest, and there was a lot of people that were very different in their attitude towards work and their attitude towards a lot of things up there. And that really taught me how to communicate with people who had very different views than I did, and how to work with people who were not used to working the way that I worked, as well as just some great stories, some great life lessons at camp, because you're distilled down into a very intense environment at camp. Like everything is go, 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 but you've got all these kids around you and you're managing like children. I don't know how teachers do it. I really don't. They don't get enough credit. Like I would manage these children for a couple hours and I'm exhausted. So I don't know how they do it day after day. After that, went down to Houston for optometry school, and now I'm here in Fort Worth. So just a little bit all over the place. I probably still need to hit the East Coast a little bit more next, but
Yeah, those teachers they are made of stronger stuff than us regular mortals are. I
yeah,
don't get it either.
no,
And East Coast would be fun, but it's expensive over there.
it
Like
is.
y'all are paying too much money for getting better access to lobster. I mean, come on.
Really, yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to loop us back to kind of your intro where I was stumbling on how to give you a proper title because I knew you were a doctor, but the presentation I was given about who you are as a person was more as a scientist. And I'm a silly boy that doesn't know how to combine those two thoughts into my head. So whenever you are doing your work and everything like that, it sounds like you have to be pretty scientific in what you're doing and actually be more of a scientist than necessarily just a doctor. So do you have any tips And this is where Daniel and I like to have the podcast. We've talked about this before. Now that you've convinced everybody that they should go to optometry school, we want to glean information from you outside of the sales pitch for optometry school that I hope they're paying you a lot of money for. What can you tell us about being kind of a modern scientist and how that applies to people like Daniel and I?
I think one of the biggest challenges in the world, even just the world that we live in today, is we have almost transitioned from is like this golden age of information, of having computers and being able to access any information you want anywhere, into this, period of disinformation. It's almost hard to find real, especially for like a common person. It's harder to find real good science online and in anything than it is to find real science. Between clickbait and agendas and perspective and people wanting to tell a certain narrative, it's really hard to find good science. And I think the easiest and best way to approach that is to don't just go off headlines, right? And always approach something skeptically, whether it's an opinion about something or, the headline or the conclusions that come after that. Those are all being formed by people. And while science is science and data is data, people are always talking about that data. That's always coming from a person. So approach things skeptically as well as follow the rabbit hole. That is one of my favorite things to do at my job is to follow the rabbit hole. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to go research it and I'm not going to stop at the first answer I get. I'm going to keep going. And if there's something weird, I'm going to follow it. I'm going to see, okay, this person has that opinion, but why? Follow that down. Like, go find out why they have that opinion because maybe it's a really good opinion. Maybe they have a title and you shouldn't listen to that opinion. And that takes time and effort. And that's really hard in the world that we live in that's just full of clickbait and disinformation and instant gratification. But find that thing that you're actually interested in and follow that rabbit hole and hope that it doesn't lead you to a conspiracy. And when it does, like go look into the conspiracy and say, okay, wait, this is the actual data point that they're pulling this from, right? Because a lot of those things start in truth and then they very quickly like extrapolate and deteriorate so quick into like a chaos conspiracy theory. So go find out where it started. Go find out the real data point and then make your own conclusion. But don't just listen to what people say because they're saying it. Go find out the whole story because so much is misinformed, unfortunately, today.
And you nailed that on the head when you said that in this day and age, it's really hard because information used to kind of, I'm not going to say was information, but it was a lot harder to pass on maybe false information.
Mhm.
But nowadays, as we've seen with social media and people who've watched The Social Dilemma, you are basically fed information that Facebook thinks you agree with in the first place, whether or not it's right. And
Right.
that's pretty crazy that we actually have to start questioning what looks like really legitimate sources of information because it might be something that you're inclined to believe in or agree with, I think is what you're kind of getting at.
Yeah. And I will even do it at a much more technical level of reading, scientific and peer published manuscripts. And I'll go through it and I'll read the results and I'll read the methods and I'll go, this result doesn't matter because they didn't do their methodology right. Like, we can't use this. It doesn't matter that it's published. It doesn't matter that somebody else said yes, because I can tell you they didn't run the right statistics. They didn't have the numbers to support this. And normally, if I'm questioning statistics, I call in our statistician because I am not a statistician. But I at least can kind of get a gauge of like, this smells weird. I should get somebody who knows more about this than me. And that's very discouraging to the general population of like, okay, so even if it's, published in Nature, you're telling me it can still be wrong?
That's crazy. And it is scary being a consumer because I will periodically look at a published study and I go, this looks really legitimate. Oh, and look, they have a conclusion down here. What's the conclusion say? Oh,
Hmm.
cool. It says this thing, and that must be right because I'm not going through it. I don't have the
Yeah.
background, and most of us don't have the background. So,
I mean, if I'm looking at something in immunology, even like if anything outside of my optometry or the products that I review, that realm that I'm specialized in, I wouldn't be able to pick apart their methodology. I don't have the information to.
well, and I love what you were saying there about you aren't putting your ego on the line here. You're
No.
saying, like, hey, I know what my lane is, and I am not scared to call in the stats guy, or I'm
Yeah.
not afraid to bring in this other expert because I can accept that I'm not there. And I'm going to go find someone who is. And if all of us were more willing to admit when we don't know something and ask somebody who is probably an expert or at least has a knowledge base that
Yeah.
might work within it, that would be great. That would be a much better world that we would live in.
Yes. And along with that, especially when I read stuff and when I read things that are out of my realm, but with that understanding that not every conclusion is perfect, is this is somebody very intelligent made this conclusion and they have a reasoning for that, regardless if I think it's perfect based off their results. I take that, right? Like Faith, the little computer, that's now a data point in my brain that I'm holding up to everything else that I do. And as you read more, that's when you start getting better at that. So the more you read, the more you follow that rabbit hole down, now you start being able to see like that person's opinion doesn't fit into the standard. Why is that? And does that change the way I behave? You can have a lot of thoughts, right? Like even today with all of these masks and if you're vaccinated, should you be wearing a mask? How much does it help? Should you be wearing 2 masks? Should you be wearing 4 masks? All these things, does that impact what you're actually going to do? And you can ask a lot of interesting questions, but when it comes back to like, listen, it could be right, it could be wrong, but I'm going to play it safe and wear my mask when I go into a crowded place, when I go in to be around other people, because the general consensus is that this is helpful and it's not directly hindering me. Then it's okay to have those interesting thoughts and have those conversations and those challenging things when it's not going to completely shift your world. Because if you're using one article in one place and you haven't fully followed that rabbit trail and you're going to let it change everything you do, that's when I think it can get really dangerous.
That's great. And it's important as, so to say, modern digital citizens to be able to take that, I don't know, grain of salt with whatever we're seeing and make responsible choices based on, I know you said you're not a stats person, but basically you're talking about stats. You're like, hey, more than likely this should be the course. And even if it's not, this is, I'm minimizing this other side of the equation. So I'm going to go this direction.
And really kind of that minimal bar when I look at a study is I'm looking at the population size. Is this study in a sample of 5 people or is it a sample of 500? And if it's on a sample of 5, like, okay, this is an interesting study to read, but it's probably not representative of everybody.
No, that's great information. I love it.
The idea of like reading studies is really interesting, but I also don't want to belabor the point. I'm glad that we talked about, or I'm glad that you brought up the population size, because I feel like if there's like one thing you can tell a layperson on a study, it's like you don't have to read all of the methodology, but just look at like how big the study was because man, if it's so small, there are just so many confounding variables that could actually be the real reason when you're dealing with such a small number.
Yeah. And to just look at that population, that right, the sample size and who they're looking at. One of the biggest things in big medicine is that there are medical and biological differences between ethnicities. So if a study is only done in, 50 plus women, white women, you got to take that with a grain of salt of how it applies to the person in your chair. So take a look at who the study is on, if it's a big sample, small sample, and what the population is. And that will give you a lot of information and a lot of framework when you go to look at the conclusions or read the abstract.
Yeah. Or even like geographically, was everybody in this study from the same town?
Yes.
And that's one thing I try to think about, because I'm not a scientist, but I just try to read things and go in with the mindset of, can I reasonably think of another reason why the result of this study could have been reached?
Yeah.
based on like yeah, the group studied. And if I can reasonably think of something, there's a good chance that I need to take it with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. I just need to take it with a grain of salt.
Yep. My favorite one is the confounder of obesity on lung cancer. Oh, I might butcher this story, and this might have been just something I heard. But
No, go for it.
initially, when there was, information and studies coming out that tobacco and smoking was causing lung cancer, there's a lot of pushback from tobacco companies because if your product actively causes cancer, that's not a great slogan for you. Apparently, there was some pushback saying, listen, you got it wrong. What's causing it is a sedentary lifestyle and obesity. And if you look at the people you're selecting, it's just their sedentary lifestyle that's causing their lung cancer. And it's like, wait, there may have been a correlation, but that doesn't mean there's causation. But that's just like my favorite example of correlation, causation, and confounding variables.
Well, that's a great example of where you can definitely use science as a weapon, because I hadn't heard that one. But smoking, you could go back and look at many, many studies that they did when they were trying to prove that smoking wasn't causing cancer, because that was a long fight that they eventually lost. But there's a lot of degreed and medically sound people that signed off on studies that were like, oh, hey, this is totally fine. And now we know better and we can laugh about it. But in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good story. And that leads into, we actually like to have stories at the end. So you had your gap year, you had all these adventures basically through school that kicked your butt. Now you're a working human with power tools. Do you have any stories you want to share with Daniel and I before we sign you off on this?
Oh, yes. I actually have a sticky note on my desk to remind me of this story every day. When I was at camp, I was a lifeguard for years, so I was kind of in charge of the canoeing and kayaking and boating for like these 4th and 5th graders. And there was one day that me and my 2 boating partners, we are taking this big group of like 30 or 40 4th and 5th graders who have never been in canoes out onto a lake. So, you do all the safety training, and this is your life jacket, and this is your paddle, and this is how we're going to go out onto the lake. And you've got these 4th and 5th graders, boys and girls, and, how they normally are you cool? Are we cool? Like, what are we going to do? So we get them all in the boats. We're all set off. We get them pushed off. We get into the lake. We start paddling out, and straight in front of us is a huge rain cloud. You can just see this wall of rain headed towards us. And all 3 of us just like dread fills, because we've been in this situation before where like we're all there in our swimsuits and we're going to go swimming afterwards. But somehow when it rains and we have people in boats, we all lose it and we need to go in. Like we can't be in a boat when it's raining. And we just go, we're like, oh my gosh, we just took an hour to get here. We're going to have to turn them around and go back because it's raining. And one kid in one of the canoes up to us, he looks at us and he's like, can we go into the storm? And we're like, it just completely blew our minds. And we're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, let's just go straight. I was like, you want a canoe just right into the wall of rain ahead of us? He's like, yes. And I'm like, let's go. And you can like hear around in the boats because other people can like see the rain. And it's like, okay, which way is this going to go? And he just yells into the storm as loud as he can. And it just like has this ripple effect through everybody else. And they were all just like, and all of them just start paddling as hard as they could, just like straight into this wall of rain. We're all soaked and they had a blast. Like nobody had ever let them do that before, And it always reminds me of how big of a difference your attitude can make when you approach a problem, not just for you, but for the people around you. Like attitudes really are infectious. And when you come up against a challenge, what is going to be your attitude? Whenever I have something really, really tough, like a big project or a big rain wall in front of me, I try to just remind myself, buckle down and into the storm. Like, let's go.
Oh my goodness, I want to meet this kid. That guy is going to be a hero. That is, you have a
Oh,
little mini Thor with you.
yes, yes, he was so excited. I was like, okay, let's go.
Well, and that is so cool because it is a lot of, so to say, adults, we lose that mindset of, hey, we can do this thing. Like, it's going to be slightly uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't go into the storm. Like, you could have fun and you could forget about the consequences, do the thing that looks hard and take that challenge. That's awesome.
Stop trying to avoid challenges and to live the most comfortable life and go find something to accomplish, knowing that it's going to take everything out of you to do it.
Beautiful. That is a beautiful note to end on. We're going to leave it there.
All right.
Well, Faith, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time. This has been an awesome conversation. And Daniel and I are both going to go try and join you in the ranks of apparently adventure-filled optometry school
And
students.
there you go. Well, hey, I've got kayaks. So if you guys are in town, let me know and we'll find a storm to
Oh,
head into.
you've got it. We're going to hold you to that. Well, everybody listening, thank you for hanging out with us. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Faith really dropped some knowledge for us. So thank you for letting us share some of your wisdom. Faith, thank you for coming on, everybody. Thank you. And we look forward to connecting with you guys soon.